The world holds its breath. The year is 1683. Summer heat shimmers over the plains of Hungary. A beautiful, cruel lie. The earth itself is cold with a deep geologic fear. It trembles, a constant low drumming underfoot that vibrates up through the soles of your boots and into your soul. Not from nature, from empire, from the relentless, world-ending machine of Ottoman ambition. 150,000 boots, hooves, and wheels moving west in a synchronized, terrifying rhythm. An ocean of men, a migration of human purpose bent on conquest. It takes 3 full hours for its vanguard to pass a single, stricken tree on the roadside, a sentinel witnessing the apocalypse. Its wake is a permanent scar of dust that stains the horizon for days. Above them, the crescent banners of the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed IV, flutter not like flags, but like a million black petals, a swarm of locusts blotting out the very sun, casting the land into an early twilight. This is the seemingly unstoppable force. But every story needs a hero. If you love tales of impossible odds, hit that like button now and subscribe to the channel, because the hero of this story is not who you'd expect, and his arrival is something you have to see. This is the personal weapon of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the most feared commander of the most terrifying military force on earth. A man whose name was whispered in dread from the canals of Venice to the spires of Paris. He has painted the Balkans red, a cartographer of carnage. City after proud city has fallen before him, left as smouldering pyres against the sky, monuments to his will. His ambition is a fire that consumes everything in its path, fueled by the promise of eternal glory in the eyes of his sultan. And now, his gaze sharp and calculating, fixes on the ultimate prize. The golden apple. The jewel in the crown of Christendom. The free city of Vienna. Think about this for a second. Hit pause and really consider it. If Vienna falls, the Danube becomes an Ottoman river, a highway for their armies. If Vienna falls, the gates of Germany swing open, its fractured states ripe for the taking. If Vienna falls, the fragile, fractured world of Europe, Italy, France, Spain, the distant coasts of England, all become mere provinces in a new world order, a calendar reset to the year 0 of Ottoman rule. The Sultan has promised Mustafa more than gold, more than land. He has promised him immortality in song and stone. The man who delivers Vienna will become legend, his name etched alongside Alexander and Caesar. Europe knows the storm is coming. Europe hears the thunder, and Europe does nothing. The Holy Roman Emperor Leopold, a man whose title is grander than his power, has already packed his court, his art, his family, and fled Vienna for safer lands. His empire is a patchwork of jealous princes, empty boasts, and ancient rivalries. It is a ghost of Charlemagne's dream. France, under the Sun King. Louis XIV watches from its gilded palaces at Versailles. It sees Austria's peril not as a collective threat, but as a delicious opportunity. Let the Ottoman wolf savage its rival. The enemy of my enemy is my convenient distraction. The Italian states are a chorus of bickering voices, focused on trade routes and local squabbles. Protestant North and Catholic South still bleed from the wounds of the 30 Years' War, a conflict so recent the graves are still fresh. They see only the enemy across the street, the heretic in the next town. They are blind to the tsunami gathering on the horizon. They are blind. Blind to the abyss yawning open before their feet. They count coins, they nurse century-old grudges, they pray for their neighbour's failure, while their own house is doused in oil. In all the chanceries and courts of the continent, amidst the perfume and the politics, only one man looks at the map and does not see borders. He sees a front line. Only one man hears the distant thunder and knows it is a call to arms, a trumpet from heaven, not a requiem for a dying age. King Jan III, Sobieski of Poland and Lithuania. He is 60 years old. His body bears the living map of a lifetime of war, scars from Tartar arrows, Turkish sabres, the cold steel of Cossack rebellions, the hard knocks of political survival. His face is that of an old lion, weary but possessing a latent, terrifying power. His faith is not the quiet, personal faith of the cloister. It is a roaring furnace in his chest, a conviction so absolute, so visceral, it unnerves even his allies. Where others calculate odds on ledgers, he sees the hand of divine providence moving pieces on a celestial board. Where others see a doomed city, a lost cause, he sees a sacred calling, a cross laid upon his shoulders by God himself. Poland is exhausted. Her treasury is a hollow echo. Her people, the sturdy Szlachta nobility and the resilient peasants, yearn for peace after decades of conflict on their eastern frontiers. The army he can muster from his own lands is a shadow, a phantom of the vast force that marches on Vienna. A few thousand souls at most. His advisers plead caution, their voices a chorus of realpolitik. His accountants show him ledgers of red ink, columns of debt that stretch to the horizon. Sobieski listens. He nods, his face grave. He absorbs their wisdom, the weight of a king's duty to his own people, and then he does the only thing his heart, his faith, and his undying honour will allow. He makes a decision that defies all earthly logic. He sends a single rider south, a man of inconspicuous skill, carrying a message etched not on parchment, but in spirit to the commander of Vienna's garrison, Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg. The message is stripped bare, containing only 5 words that are both a promise and a prayer. Hold fast, I am coming. He does not wait for payment from the fleeing Emperor Leopold. He does not wait for permission. From a Sejm, a diet of squabbling nobles who would debate the issue until Vienna was dust, he issues a call to arms that is less a command and more a summoning, to every knight, every lord, every Tawarzish who can sit a saddle and hold a lance, to every man who feels the old fire of honour in his blood. He gathers them under the white eagle of Poland, a standard that suddenly means more than territory, it means salvation. And he begins to move. The longest, fastest, most desperate forced march in Polish history is about to begin. Because Jan Sobieski understands a truth that politicians and pragmatists have forgotten, a truth we should ask ourselves in our own lives. What would you do when the cost is everything, and the reward is only knowing you did what was right? There are moments in time that transcend calculation. When civilization itself teeters on the edge of the void, good men do not present an invoice. They pay the price. They pay it in blood, in miles, in shattered bones and exhausted spirit. They pay it because someone must. By mid-July, the Ottoman noose is drawn tight around Vienna's throat, a silk cord of supreme confidence. 150,000 besiegers, 15,000 defenders holding a perimeter meant for a quieter age. The city's walls are medieval masterpieces, beautiful and utterly obsolete. They were built for the poetry of arrows and the thud of stones, not for the mathematical, soul-crushing brutality of modern cannon. Commanding them is Count Starhemberg, a man carved from worn leather and iron will. He knows the numbers, he can recite them in his sleep. He knows the geometry of despair, the angles of attack, the weak points that cannot be shored up. He also knows, with a certainty that anchors him, that surrender is not an option. To surrender Vienna is not to lose a city. It is to surrender the idea of Europe. It is to hand over the future to a different Ged, a different law, a different sun. The siege engines awaken with a groan that shakes the very bedrock. A symphony of fire and iron begins, a composition of horror that plays 24 hours a day. The great bronze guns of the Ottomans, some so large they have names, cough their hellish breath. Stonework that has stood for centuries, that has heard hymns and market cries, dissolves into powder and pathetic rubble in an instant. But the defenders fight. They fight with a fury born of the condemned. They fight for every inch of parapet, for every hour of precious daylight, for every stone that still provides cover. They fight in a new world of choking smoke and deafening noise that leaves ears bleeding and minds shattered. Inside the walls, time changes its very nature. It is no longer measured in days, but in heartbeats. In the dwindling sacks of grain counted by trembling hands. In the number of able-bodied men, boys really, still standing on the walls with muskets that grow heavier each hour. In the depth of the wounds in the overcrowded hospitals, where the air is thick with the sweet rotten smell of gangrene, Kara Mustafa makes his camp in obscene, glorious luxury, A city of silk pavilions, grander than any palace in the Balkans, springs up around Vienna like a parasitic bloom. It is so vast, a man on foot needs an hour to traverse it. He dines on spiced lamb and sweet pastries, served on silver plates by silent slaves. He invites foreign diplomats, Venetians, French, English, to dine and watch the bombardment as evening entertainment. A theatre of conquest under the stars. His officers, hungry for personal glory and loot, urge a final, overwhelming assault to claim the prize. Mustafa smiles, sips his sherbet, and refuses. Why waste good soldiers, the tools of his trade? Time and hunger are his elite troops, his invisible janissaries. They are already inside the walls, working tirelessly. He is patient. Victory is already his. It is merely ripening on the vine, and he will pluck it at the perfect moment. He does not look north. The idea that anyone, especially the fractious, backward kingdoms of the north, would challenge his destiny, his meticulously planned masterpiece, is not just foolish. It is an insult to his intellect. It is inconceivable. All of Europe watches the horizon burn from a safe distance. They believe the question is settled, the book closed. Vienna will fall. It is only a matter of when the final curtain drops, when the last spire of St. Stephen's is topped with a crescent moon. But what do you think? Could you have held on, knowing help might never come? Let me know in the comments below. Smoke becomes Vienna's permanent sky. A grey, choking shroud that blots out the stars and turns the sun into a pale, sickly coin. The streets, once alive with the music of Mozart's forebears and the clamour of commerce, are now silent as a cathedral at midnight. A silence punctuated only by the distant rhythmic thud, thud, thud of cannon fire, a giant's heartbeat, and the closer, sharper animal cries of the wounded in the makeshift hospitals. The city is dying not by the dramatic sword, but by the slow, inexorable, humiliating squeeze of famine. A death by inches, by grams, by empty bellies. Food vanishes from the markets, then hope vanishes from the eyes. People become alchemists of despair. They boil leather from shoes, belts, and bookbindings to make a thin, bitter broth that offers no sustenance, only the illusion of a meal. A single rat becomes a treasure fought over in dark cellars, its meat a rare delicacy. The very old and the very young slip away first, their lives extinguished like candles in a draught. Their bodies, light as kindling from the wasting, are gathered in silent carts at dawn, not killed by glorious Ottoman steel, but by the silent, patient, mocking enemy within the walls. Water sources are fouled by corpses or cut off by Ottoman sappers. Disease walks the streets hand in hand with hunger, a grisly couple, dysentery, typhus, fever, wounds that fester and turn black, requiring amputation with saws blunt from overuse. And yet they fight. This is the part that always gets me, the sheer, stubborn, beautiful defiance of the human spirit. Civilians, their faces gaunt and permanently soot-stained, dig secondary trenches behind the crumbling walls with tools meant for gardens. Old men, their hands trembling with palsy, stand watch, with pikes they can barely lift, their presence alone a statement. Young boys, their childhood stolen, form silent human chains, passing jagged stones hand to hand to mend the latest breach, their small fingers bleeding. Women, their fine silks and lace long since traded for wool and practicality, mould musket balls at kitchen tables and load weapons for their husbands and sons with a calm, terrifying efficiency. The home has become the front line. Every single dawn, as a grey light filters through the smoke, Count Starhemberg climbs to the highest remaining bastion, the Lovel Bastei. He surveys the damage with the cold, appraising eye of a man reading his own death warrant. The outer wall, a once proud belt of stone, now has 3 massive, gaping holes, like a skull smashed open. His fighting force, the men he knows by name, is down to 4,000 weary, hollow-eyed souls. They have held for 2 months. 60 days of hell. They are living ghosts, defending what is quickly becoming their own tomb. In his journal, under the light of a single guttering candle, the ink scarce, he writes a line that chills me every time. We are the dead, refusing to lie down. We will not yield, but God, let him come soon. Outside, in his glorious city of silk and arrogance, Kara Mustafa's certainty hardens into a diamond-hard arrogance. Bazaars spring up between the gun emplacements as if this is a permanent fair. Spice merchants, slave traders, fortune-tellers plying their trades. Musicians play soothing makam each evening as the great guns provide the bass percussion. The Grand Vizier is already spending Vienna's wealth in his mind, dividing its churches into mosques, its palaces into seraglios. He is the master of all he surveys, a god on earth, and the world is his to reshape. But far to the north, beyond his sight, beyond the limits of his imagination, a single spark has been struck in the Polish darkness, a spark that will ignite a blaze to consume his silk city. This is the moment the story turns. Make sure you're following along, smash that like button if you're gripped so far. It tells the algorithm you want more content like this. An army gathers, not from the centres of European power, but from its edges, its margins. It is not the vast, impersonal, grinding machine of the Ottomans. It is smaller, more human, a patchwork of loyalties, and it moves with a purpose that borders on the divine, a pilgrimage of violence. King Jan Sobieski has sounded the horn across a divided continent, and a few brave, seemingly foolish hearts have answered. Duke Charles of Lorraine, a competent and steadfast soldier, arrives with 20,000 Austrian and German troops, a ragged, undersupplied but fiercely determined force. The German princes of the south, Bavaria, Saxony, Franconia, send contingents. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Every man a volunteer staring into the mouth of impossible odds. They come not for pay, for there is none. They come because they finally understand. The line is here, at Vienna. And from the north, from the vast, rolling plains and deep forests of the Commonwealth, Sobieski leads his soul south. He brings the heart of Poland, the Hussaria, the Winged Hussars, 3,000 men. This is not an army in the common sense. It is a brotherhood, a priesthood of war. They are the last true knights of Europe, an anachronism of chivalry in an age of gunpowder, and they are arriving at the last possible moment, the final second on the clock of destiny. Each man is a lord, a landowner, a political power in his own right. Their armour is not mere protection. It is a masterpiece of metallurgy and art, etched with religious iconography and heraldic beasts, polished to a mirror shine, worth more than a village. On their backs rise curved wooden frames, bearing the feathers of eagles, hawks, swans, and ostriches. These wings are not mere decoration. They are a psychological weapon of sound and sight, a technology of terror perfected over generations. In a charge, the wind would scream through the feathers, creating a ghostly, roaring whistle, a sound from nightmare. They made the riders appear larger than life, supernatural, a wall of feathers and steel descending from another world. Their primary weapon is the copia, a lance 18 feet long, light, hollow, designed to shatter on impact, so the rider is not unhorsed by the weight of a dying man impaled on it. After the lance shatters, the sabre, a curve of lightning. After the sabre, the Nadziak warhammer for crushing plate armour. They are the most expensive, most elite, most visually stunning cavalry the world has ever seen. Any one of them could have stayed on his vast estate, surrounded by safety, comfort, and family. They ride to Vienna because their king rides. They ride because honour is not just a word in a book, but the compass by which they navigate life. They ride because some things, faith, freedom, the future of your children's world, are infinitely more important than a long, quiet life. They ride to meet what they believe is the end of the world, to greet it with lances lowered. The numbers are a sick joke, a punchline written in blood. Even combined, the so-called relief army will field maybe 27,000 tired, march-weary men. They will be facing over 80,000 veteran Ottomans, dug in, fortified, supplied, and waiting on ground of their own choosing. It is not a battle plan, it is a form of ritual suicide, a glorious last stand in the wrong place. Sobieski knows the numbers. He is a brilliant tactician, he can count. On the eve of departure, he writes to his beloved wife, Queen Maria Kazimiera, "My dear heart, I go to save Vienna, and with it, all Christendom. If I perish there, remember me to our children, and tell them their father died where God willed him to be, doing what God demanded of him. He does not write of victory. He writes of duty. He writes of sacrifice. He writes his own epitaph, and it is one of purpose. Inside Vienna, as August bleeds into a desperate, sweltering September, the last grains of hope, like the last grains of wheat, run out. The walls are now more breach than barrier, a sieve. Gunpowder is counted by the ounce, hoarded for a final close-quarters melee. The Ottoman miners are so close beneath the foundations, the defenders lying on the ground at night can hear the faint, sinister scrape, scrape, scrape of their picks in the silent, dark earth, the sound of worms boring into a coffin. On September the 9th, Kahlenberg makes his final desperate gamble. He sends a messenger, a man of shadows and silent steps, to slip through the Ottoman lines under a moonless sky. The message is stripped of all ceremony, all formality. It is the raw, exposed nerve of a doom command. Come now, or do not come at all. We have hours, perhaps less, not days. On the night of September 10th, a different kind of tremor runs through the dying city, not from cannon, from rumour, the most powerful force left to them. A sentry on the highest spire of St. Stephen's Cathedral, his eyes raw from staring, swears to his comrades he saw a pinprick of light, then another, on the faraway dark mass of the Kahlenberg mountain. Not a campfire, but a signal. Another man, a water carrier with ears sharpened by hunger, claims he heard, carried on a freak shift of the wind, the faint silver unmistakable call of a cavalry trumpet. Not the wail of an Ottoman zurna, a Christian call, a Latin call. People, emaciated and frail as paper dolls, stumble from their cellars and hiding places. Driven by an instinct they cannot name, they climb onto broken walls, onto rooftops with missing tiles. They stare north into the swallowing darkness, their eyes straining until they water. They hold their breath, the entire city becoming a single, silent question. Then, in the cool, grey, fragile light, just before dawn on September 11th, they see it. Banners. First one, a speck of colour against the green of the forest. Then 10. Then a forest of them, a moving tapestry cresting the wooded slopes of the Kahlenberg mountain. The black double-headed eagle of the Holy Roman Empire. The defiant white eagle of Poland on a crimson field. The blue and white lozenges of Bavaria. The crossed swords of Saxony, the lion of Franconia. The relief army has arrived. They exist. They are real. Inside Vienna, a sound forgotten for months erupts, ragged and joyous. Church bells, a cacophony of pealing from every surviving spire ringing out over the ruins, a sound of pure undiluted emotion. People weep in the streets, clutching each other, their tears cutting tracks through the grime on their faces. They do not know, they cannot know, if this small, distant force can actually save them. The odds are still impossible, a mathematical absurdity. But for the first time in 2 months, they know they will not die alone. They will not die forgotten. A whisper, dry as autumn leaves, passes from mouth to ear, from heart to hopeful heart, a sacred incantation. The Polish king is here. The march south was a living psalm written in mud, sweat, blood, and unbreakable will. Sobieski, a master of logistics as well as battle, pushed his polyglot army over 500 miles of unforgiving wilderness, through the treacherous Carpathian passes, where sudden summer storms turned ancient trails into rivers of slick, sucking clay that claimed wagons and horses. Through primeval forests of oak and pine, so dense and dark, day became a perpetual green twilight, and the sense of being buried alive was constant. They forded rivers where the icy, raging current threatened to sweep men, cannon, and all hope away into oblivion. They moved at a pace that defied contemporary military doctrine, that defied human endurance. 40 miles some days, 50 when the latest intelligence from Vienna spoke of crumbling bastions and starvation. They slept in their saddles, heads nodding, trusting their horses to follow the road. They ate cold kassa and dried meat, their jaws aching. Vienna was a dying heart, and every heartbeat, every second of its faltering rhythm counted. They were racing a clock whose final tick was the fall of a city. The hussars rode at the vanguard, a glittering, terrifying spear point of faith and steel. The legends about them had travelled faster than their horses, carried by merchants and refugees. Men in inns from Warsaw to Prague said they were angels of death, that their wings were real. Men whispered they were invincible, blessed by the Virgin Mary herself. Seeing them now, in the flesh, it was easy to believe the myths. The morning sunlight fractured on their polished plate armour, turning each man into a walking constellation. Their feathered wings, strapped to their backs and armed over backs with leather harnesses, gave them the silhouette of mythical beasts. Centaurs from a forgotten age. These were not common soldiers following orders. They were the embodiment of a nation's fierce pride and unbreakable martial spirit. Each Tawalsish was a landed noble, a senator of the realm, a king in his own district. Their very presence on this mad mission was a statement to a watching, cynical Europe. We have not yet surrendered our soul. We still believe in causes greater than ourselves. At Tulln, a town on the Danube, the Polish force finally linked with Duke Charles of Lorraine and the bedraggled imperial troops. It was an alliance forged in the cold fire of necessity, not warm affection. Poles and Austrians, men whose nations had clashed over borderlands, Catholics and Protestants, soldiers who had been taught for a century that the other was a heretic, a blight on Christendom. They eyed each other across the campfires with suspicion, with old hatred simmering just below the surface, ready to boil over. But then they looked south, towards the orange glow on the horizon that was not the sunset. They saw the permanent pillar of smoke over Vienna. They heard, even at this distance, the faint, never-ending thunder of the great siege guns, a sound that never slept. And in that shared vision of absolute doom, the old divisions, the ancient grudges, melted like frost under a sudden fierce sun. They were no longer Poles, Austrians, Germans, Catholics, Lutherans. They were the last line, the final, thin wall between the world they knew and a world reshaped by the crescent. If this wall broke here, on these plains, there was nothing behind them but the abyss, a dark age rolling west, a raw, desperate faith, and the simple, animal will to survive, forged them in that moment into a single, desperate blade. The blade had to strike true, or it would shatter. On the night of September 11th, the Allied army, a river of determined shadows, moved into the dense cover of the Vienna woods. A sea of men and horses flowing silently under the canopy of ancient oaks and beeches, the leaves whispering secrets. No fires were lit, giving no pinpoint of light to Ottoman scouts. Voices were murmurs, then whispers, then silence. The woods themselves, ancient witnesses to history, seemed to hold their breath, knowing what was to come. At dawn on September the 12th, the command group, King Jan Sobieski, a solid, unmoving rock at its centre, rode to the bare summit of the Kahlenberg. They looked down, through the dissipating morning mist, and the breath was stolen from their bodies, a physical blow. Below them, stretching to the haze of the horizon, was the Ottoman host in its full, terrifying majesty. Not a mob, but a living organism of war. 80,000 men, a meticulously ordered universe of violence, row upon row of white tents like a field of poisonous mushrooms, perfectly aligned. Artillery parks dense with the bronze snouts of hundreds of cannon. The flashing, scaled armour of the Sipahi cavalry, the Sultan's own elite horsemen, a restless sea of horsemen numbering in the tens of thousands. The distinctive red and gold banners and tall Burke hats of the Janissaries, the legendary slave soldier infantry who had never known defeat, who were the foundation of Ottoman power. And between the mountain and the dying city, a wide, rolling plain, a perfect killing ground, every inch of it surveyed, measured and zeroed by Ottoman gunners. It was a trap, and they were about to spring it, on themselves. Even Sobieski, a veteran of countless fields, a man who had stared down Tartar hordes, felt the immense physical weight of it crush down upon his shoulders. 27,000 tired, hungry men. Against that, a younger man, a more conventionally cautious man, would have hesitated, would have called a council, looked for another way, a feint, a delay, a diplomatic trick. Jan Sobieski was 60. He had seen the face of God in the chaos of battle, and he had seen the face of the devil in defeat. He understood in his bones that history pivots on such razor-thin moments of decision. That courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act, to move forward, while your heart tries to beat its way out of your chest and every instinct screams to run. That when evil stands triumphant, gloating at the gate, good men do not ask for a better plan, for more men, for a miracle. They become the plan. They become the miracle. He turned to his gathered commanders, their faces pale in the morning light. His own face was a mask of serene, absolute certainty. His voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and carved from granite. It left no room for question, for doubt, for anything but action. Gentlemen, we attack today, at noon. The Hussars will lead. Make your peace with God. See to your men. Across the Allied lines, hidden in the woods, as the morning sun climbed and dappled the forest floor, a profound, sacred quiet descended. Not a quiet of paralyzing fear, but of solemn preparation. Men knelt in clearings, their weapons beside them. Catholic priests in simple robes moved among them, offering blessings in Latin, the ancient words of comfort before death. Protestant chaplains, their Bibles worn, led hymns in German, the sturdy melodies of Luther rising through the trees. For one morning, on this wooded mountainside, there was no schism, no reformation, no counter-reformation. There were only men, fathers and sons, about to die for something infinitely bigger than dogma. They were about to die for a future. The Hussars saw to their final preparations. The ritual was sacred, a liturgy of war. They checked the leather bindings of their winged frames, ensuring no strap would fail. They tested the balance of their long copia lances, feeling the heft, the deadly promise. They tightened saddle girths one last time, and whispered into the twitching ears of their massive armoured destriers, calming the beasts who sensed the coming storm. Some wrote final letters with steady hands, knowing they might never be delivered. Others simply closed their eyes, breathing slowly, committing to memory the scent of pine and damp earth, the feel of the cool morning air on their faces, the last peace they might ever know. At 1100 hours, the Allied army began its descent from the Kahlenberg, a river of determined steel flowing downhill into hell. First, the Imperial infantry advanced in disciplined lines, a roaring wall of muskets and the glint of bayonets and pikes crashing into the Ottoman outposts and forward trenches. The sound was a continuous rolling thunder of individual shots merging into one. Roar. Then the German and Austrian cavalry, the cuirassiers and dragoons, swept in from the flanks, a hammering, chaotic melee of flashing sabres and the bark of horse pistols. The battle was joined in earnest. It was fierce. It was bloody. Men fell on both sides, the neat lines dissolving into a swirling, screaming chaos of individual duels. And it was moving, too, slowly. From the battered, broken walls of Vienna, the desperate defenders, their last strength summoned, could see the battle raging on the plain below. It was a distant, silent movie of death, the sounds swallowed by distance. Knowing this was their only chance, they launched their own final suicidal sortie. They burst from the city gates they had defended for so long, a ragged band of ghosts, to attack the Ottoman siege lines from behind. They were buying time, the most precious commodity, with the last currency they had, their lives. If the main Allied cavalry did not break the Ottoman centre soon, the city would fall from within, and the relief force would be surrounded and shattered in the open field. The clock's final seconds were ticking. King Jan Sobieski watched all this from a low ridge overlooking the maelstrom. He saw the styled lines, the grinding, costly fight. He saw the banners of Vienna still flying, but just barely, like a flag in a hurricane. He saw the tiny, desperate sortie from the city gates, a spark trying to start a fire. He made his decision. The moment was now. It was all or nothing. Behind him, on the ridge, the world seemed to hold its breath, one final time. 3,000 winged hussars formed into a single, massive, wedged-shaped formation. A human spear point, half a mile wide at the base, tapering to the king at its tip. The silence that fell over them was absolute, heavier than any noise. 3,000 lances, tipped with cruel steel, were lowered to the horizontal in a single, smooth, practiced motion. The sound was a soft, collective sigh of wood and metal, a deadly promise. 3,000 prayers were offered, silently, to the wind, to the heavens, to the God of battles. The king's sons, Prince Jacob and Prince Alexander, young men on the cusp of their own legends, took their places at his side, their personal banners snapping in the breeze. Their faces were pale but set with a grim determination, their eyes fixed ahead. Sobieski looked at them, and for a flicker of a second the commander's gaze was replaced by a father's love, a profound, painful tenderness. Then he looked forward, towards the vast Ottoman camp, towards destiny. He raised his sabre high, the simple weapon of a knight. The polished blade caught the glaring midday sun and threw back a blinding, celestial shard of light, a signal to heaven and earth. And then came the thunder. At noon on September the 12th, 1683, the ridge gave birth to a storm that would echo for centuries. 3,000 winged hussars began to move, a slow, deliberate trot at first, disciplined, terrifyingly precise, the earth beginning to drum a soft, ominous warning. Then a canter, the rhythm built, the drumming became a pounding, a heart thump felt in the chests of men a mile away. The feathered wings on their backs caught the wind as they gained speed, and they began to sing. A low, rising, ghostly roar, like a gale through a mountain pass. The sound of 1,000 eagles screaming as one, a primal shriek of fury. It was the sound of myth becoming real, of legend stepping onto the stage of history. And then they charged. The earth did not just shake, it convulsed, not from cannon, but from 18,000 iron-shod hooves striking the ground in a unison that became a seismic event. The entire Allied cavalry, Poles, Austrians, Germans, a tsunami of horsemen, followed in their wake, pulled along by their unstoppable momentum. But the eyes of friend and foe alike saw only the tip of the spear, the winged avalanche. It was the largest, most concentrated cavalry charge the world would ever witness. From the battered walls of Vienna, defenders and civilians alike watched, frozen, in a tableau of awe and hope. They saw a wave of silver, crimson, blue and gold pour down the mountain slopes in perfect rolling lines. They saw the sun flash on 1,000 points of polished steel, a glittering, deadly river. They saw the wings, a forest of white and brown feathers, creating a swirling, roaring, terrifying vision that swallowed the light. It did not look human. It did not look of this earth. It looked like the heavens had cracked open and sent down an army of avenging angels, a painting of the Last Judgment come to life. The Ottoman command saw it too, and for the first time doubt crept into their hearts. Kara Mustafa's finest cavalry, the Sipais, thousands of them, the pride of the empire, wheeled with expert precision to meet the threat. They were confident, arrogant even. They were the masters of the horse, the descendants of steppe warriors. They had broken armies across 3 continents, from Persia to the gates of Vienna itself. They had never faced the Hussaria. The distance closed. 1,000 yards, 500, 200. The Polish wedge, a solid mass of man, horse and steel, hit the Ottoman line at a full gallop. Consider the physics of that moment. The kinetic energy of a single armoured knight and his warhorse at full charge is enough to splinter an oak door. Multiply that by 3,000. The air itself compressed before them, a wall of force that hit the Ottoman line a split second before the steel did. Men were knocked from their saddles by the pressure wave alone, bones cracking from the shock before a lance ever touched them. Then the world dissolved into a singular, brutal truth. Momentum. The Hussars did not fence, they did not duel, they were a geologic event, a moving mountain. Ottoman Sipais, trained in the elegant, slashing style of the steppe bay, found their sabres glancing off, Polish plate armour designed to deflect such blows. Their own lighter armour was no match for the focus point of an 18-foot lance powered by a ton of charging horse. The lances did not just stab, they erased. They lifted men clean off their horses, punching through shield, mail and body, sometimes pinning 2 men together in a gruesome, flailing sculpture before the ashwood shafts exploded into splinters. And when the lances shattered, a new phase of horror began. The Hussars, trained for this exact transition, dropped the stub of the copia and in one fluid practice motion drew their long, straight corsairs, thrusting swords or their curved sabler sabres. Now, at point-blank range amidst the chaotic press of bodies, the work became intimate, brutal and efficient. The heavy warhammers, the nadziak, rose and fell with a dreadful, crunching rhythm, caving in helmets and crumpling plate. This was not a battle of finesse, but of applied mass and ruthless mechanics. But their true weapon was psychological. The wings. In the thick of the melee, they were not just for show, they enclosed each rider in a terrifying personal aura of sound and movement. The feathers hissed and rattled with every movement of the horse, creating a disorienting, multi-directional rustle that confused both horse and foe. To an Ottoman soldier, it was like fighting a storm, a cacophony of steel on steel, screaming horses, men's shouts, and that ever-present whispering roar from the feathers, making it impossible to locate the source of the next attack. The wings also deflected clumsy sabre blows, and in the dense press, tickled and slapped at the faces of enemy horses, causing them to rear and buck in panic, breaking formations from within. King Sobieski, at the very tip of the wedge, was the incarnate will of this force. He was not the youngest, nor the strongest knight there, but he was the most certain. His presence was a lodestone. Where his banner, the white eagle on red, waved, the Hussars fought with redoubled fury. They saw their 60-year-old king, his armour a magnet for enemy attacks, still swinging his sabre, still urging them forward, and they found strength they did not know they had. He was their father, their commander, their cause, all in one. To let him fall was unthinkable, so they pushed harder, they became an avalanche with a single mind. And the avalanche began to roll through the enemy, not just over them. The initial point of impact was a scene of pure carnage, but behind the Polish king, the wedge widened like a ploughshare turning earth. The following ranks of hussar hit the disrupted, reeling enemy and drove the wound deeper. Then came the Allied cavalry, the German cuirassiers and Austrian horsemen, exploiting the breach, widening it into a chasm, turning a puncture into a massive hemorrhage in the Ottoman body. The sound was not of battle. It was of a world breaking in two, a catastrophic, splintering, sickening crash of wood, metal, bone, and screaming horses that rolled across the plain like the voice of God. The 18-foot kopia lances did their horrific designed work. They pierced ornate sipahi armour, shield, the horse's chest, and the man behind, often in a single brutal transit. The front ranks of the elite sipahis simply vanished, ploughed under by the sheer, physics-defying momentum of 3,000 tons of charging horseflesh and steel. Lances shattered by the hundreds, the sound like a forest snapping, the riders discarding the broken stumps without breaking stride, drawing sabres, warhammers and pistols, and carving deeper into the chaos, turning the breach into a slaughterhouse. The wedge did not stop. It did not slow. It was a force of nature, a geologic event, a tsunami on horseback. It punched through the first line of cavalry as if it were paper. Then the second line of infantry supports behind them. Then the third. The Ottoman formation, so perfect and imposing moments before, began to crack under pressure it had never imagined. A hairline fracture in a dam became a fissure. The fissure became a chasm, and through that chasm poured the winged death. Panic is the most contagious virus on a battlefield. It spread through the Ottoman ranks faster than any rumour, any rider, any command. The sight of their invincible elite cavalry being annihilated in mere minutes was incomprehensible, a collapse of reality. A regiment on the left flank, seeing the tide of wings bear down on them, broke. Men turned their horses and ran. Then another regiment saw them flee and followed. Then a ripple became a wave, and the wave became a tidal surge of blind, screaming, mindless terror. The famed iron discipline of the Ottoman army, the glue that held its diverse parts together, dissolved into a struggling, choking, leaderless mob. The famed Janissaries, the legendary slave soldier infantry, tried desperately to form their traditional defensive squares, a hedgehog of steel and musket fire. The hussars, their momentum still colossal, simply rode over them, through them, trampling them into the mud. They were not fighting men anymore. They were an instrument of divine wrath, a scythe cutting wheat. King Jan Sobieski was the soul of this storm. His great bay stallion, a beast of war, was covered in gore and dust, a demon from a fable. His sabre rose and fell with mechanical efficiency, a conductor's baton orchestrating a symphony of ruin. His sons fought at his shoulders, their own blades flashing, their banners held high amidst the melee. He led from the absolute front, in the thickest of the killing, because that is what a true king does, not just rule, but lead, especially when the fate of a world, of an idea, rests on a single sharp point of steel and the courage behind it. In his lavish silk command pavilion, surrounded by the loot of a half-conquered continent, Kara Mustafa Pasha watched the unthinkable unfold in mute horror. The army he had built over a Deus. Lifetime of service, the certain victory he had guaranteed to his sultan, was unravelling before his eyes like a cheap carpet. The sound he had dismissed as rumour, the roaring whistle of the wings, grew louder, closer, more personal. For the first time, the Grand Vizier, the conqueror, the master of the chessboard, felt the cold, slimy finger of real fear touch his spine. Then, as the Polish royal banner and the winged horde became terrifyingly clear through the swirling dust, he felt a pure, unadulterated terror. The terror of a man who sees his entire life's work, his legacy, his very existence, about to be erased. He ran. He abandoned everything. His treasure chests, his detailed maps of Europe, his ceremonial robes of office, most symbolically, the solid gold, jewel-encrusted ceremonial apple, crafted specifically as a gift for Sultan Mehmed upon the conquest of Vienna, the golden apple of world dominion. He left behind the sprawling silent city of tents, now a ghost town, awaiting plunder. He left behind the siege guns, cold and silent for the first time in months. He left behind the entire logistical apparatus of a campaign meant to last years, mountains of grain, barrels of water and wine, forges, field hospitals now overflowing with his wounded, the personal belongings of 80,000 men. Most hauntingly, he left behind his own household, scribes, cooks, servants, slaves, and his personal harem, all now frozen in terror as the sound of hooves grew nearer. In his silk pavilion, on a low table next to his abandoned divan, lay the ultimate symbol of his hubris, a single, perfect, ripe peach on a golden plate, uneaten. The feast was over, the hunter had become the prey, fleeing not just an army, but the judgment of history itself. On the field, the victory transformed from a military triumph into a scene of biblical scale and surreal contrast. The disciplined charge gave way to a frantic, sprawling pursuit that lasted until darkness fell. Polish and German horsemen chased fleeing Ottomans for miles, cutting down stragglers, capturing abandoned wagons laden with loot from 100 Balkan villages. The plain, so meticulously ordered hours before, was now a chaotic diorama of overturned cannons, burning tents, scattered precious carpets, and flocks of released sheep and goats wandering aimlessly among the dead. And in the centre of it all stood the Winged Hussars, finally halted, their great horses heaving, steam rising from their lathered flanks in the cool evening air. The adrenaline of the charge was ebbing, replaced by a profound, deafening exhaustion. Many simply sat in their saddles, staring blankly, their minds struggling to process the fury they had just unleashed and survived. Others dismounted on trembling legs to tend to wounded comrades, or to gently close the eyes of the fallen. Their magnificent wings were broken, feathers torn and askew, frames splintered by errant blows. Their armour, once gleaming, was dented, scratched and smeared with grime and blood. They looked less like angels now, and more like what they were, mortals who had passed through the very furnace of war and emerged, scarred and stunned, on the other side. Yet as they looked towards Vienna, they saw the lights. Not the fires of siege, but the lights of a city coming back to life. Torches and candles being lit in windows that had been dark for weeks. And they heard the bells, that joyous, clamorous pealing that was the only thanks they would ever need. In that moment, the exhaustion was laced with a quiet, unshakable pride. They had done it. They had actually done the impossible. But for the architect of this nightmare, there was no such moment of reflection. He fled on a fast horse, a man reduced to his most basic animal instinct, leaving an empire's dream dying in the blood and mud of the field behind him. By nightfall, it was over. The plain was a sombre, moonlit landscape of broken dreams, broken weapons, and broken men. The mighty Ottoman army, 1,000 strong that morning, had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. 15,000 lay dead on the field. The rest were scattered to the winds, a broken, demoralized stream of humanity fleeing south in utter, shameful disarray, abandoning their entire siege camp, their guns, their pride. The siege of Vienna was broken, shattered by a single afternoon of unimaginable courage. The heart of Europe had been saved, not by the vast armies of a united continent, but by a miracle wrought by 3,000 winged knights and the indomitable old king who led them. As the sun bled its last light into the western horizon, painting the sky in victorious hues of purple and gold, King Jan Sobieski, exhausted beyond any human measure, rode slowly through the shattered, yet now open, gates of Vienna. He was a figure of myth, covered in the grime, sweat and blood of battle, his magnificent armour dented and stained, his face etched with a profound, bone-deep weariness that spoke of more than physical effort. The streets were lined with the saved, the resurrected. People wept uncontrollably, reaching out with trembling hands to touch his stirrup, his muddy boot, the flank of his glorious, weary horse. They threw not flowers, for there were none, but scraps of precious cloth, ribbons, blessings. They were ghosts thanking the man who had chased away their death. He dismounted before the great scarred cathedral of St. Stephen's, its spire still standing against the violated sky. He walked inside, the silence of the sacred candle-lit space a profound, almost physical shock after the day's cacophony of death. He knelt alone before the high altar, in the quiet and the flickering light a simple soldier before his God, and he spoke 3 words in Latin that would echo down the centuries, not as a boast of conquest, but as a humble testament to the source of all strength. Veni, vidi, Deus Vicit. I came. I saw. God conquered. Not we conquered. Not I, Jan Sobieski, conquered. God. Because in that moment of supreme earthly triumph, amidst the greatest victory of his life, the Polish king understood the true, profound source of the thunder. That courage is a loan from heaven, repaid in action. That the strength to do the impossible, to charge into the mouth of hell, is borrowed from a well deeper than any human spirit. That when the tide of history turns on a single, impossible, glorious charge, it is not by human hands and horses alone. The tide had turned forever. The Ottoman advance into the heart of Europe was finished, its forward momentum broken at the walls of Vienna. The sound that broke it was thunder, the thunder of 18,000 hooves, the thunder of 3,000 wings singing a hymn of death, the thunder of men who looked at the end of everything and chose, against all odds, against all reason, to stand in the breach and charge. On that September day, the Winged Hussars rode out of the Polish forests and into the eternal legend of the West. They carried the weight of a civilization on their lance tips, on their tired shoulders, and they did not falter, they did not bend. Against all reason, against all odds, Europe stood. What did you think of the charge of the Winged Hussars? Could you imagine being one of those knights, knowing you were the last hope? What other last stands in history grip you? Let's get a conversation going in the comments below. I read every single one, and if this story of courage against impossible odds fired you up, do the team a huge favour, smash the like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe and hit that bell for more deep dives into history's most epic moments. We have so many more stories like this to tell. Until next time, remember, sometimes the thunder is the sound of hope arriving.